Think about the last time you were truly happy. Not excited, not relieved, truly, quietly happy. Now ask yourself this: what was different about that moment? Because here is something that most people never stop to notice. In that moment, they were not chasing anything. They were not fixing anything. They were just there. Why is it that the moments we fight the hardest for rarely feel as good as the ones we simply allowed? There was a man once. He spent 40 years planning the perfect life, perfect job, perfect home, perfect retirement, and the day everything was finally in place, he sat in his chair, looked around at all of it, and felt nothing. Not joy, not peace, just a strange, hollow silence. His neighbor, who had almost nothing, was laughing in the garden next door, watering plants, talking to birds, living like the world owed him nothing and gave him everything. Welcome to Wisdom Woven, where ancient wisdom meets the questions your modern mind is quietly asking. If this is your first time here, you are in exactly the right place. Before we go any further, take just 1 second and drop a comment below telling us this: are you someone who accepts life or someone who fights it? Just one word. That single comment might be the most honest thing you do today, and it will help this video reach someone out there who really, really needs it right now. Like this video, share it with one person you care about, and subscribe so you never miss a conversation like this one. Now, let us talk about happiness, the real kind. Not the kind they sell you in advertisements, not the kind that depends on a salary increase or a relationship going perfectly, the kind that sits quietly in the chest, even when things are not going the way they were planned. Buddhism has been sitting with this question for over 2,500 years, and the answer it keeps returning to is not what most people expect. It is not positive thinking, it is not detachment, it is not escaping the world. It is something far simpler and somehow far harder. It is acceptance. But here is where people immediately get confused. Acceptance does not mean agreeing that everything is fine. It does not mean smiling through pain or pretending that loss does not hurt. The Buddha never said that. What he said was far more precise. He said that suffering does not come from pain itself. It comes from resisting pain. Read that again slowly. The suffering is not in the pain, it is in the resistance. There's a teaching in Buddhism called the second arrow. The idea is this: when something painful happens, that's the first arrow. It hits, it hurts, that's life. But then immediately the human mind fires a second arrow at the same wound, and that second arrow is made of thoughts like, why did this happen to me? This is unfair. It should not be this way. How do I fix this? What if it doesn't get better? And that second arrow, the Buddha said, is the one that truly destroys us. The pain of life is often unavoidable, but most of the suffering people carry is self-inflicted, shot by their own thinking. A monk was once asked, how do you remain so calm when difficult things happen around you? He paused for a moment and then said simply, I feel it, and then I do not add anything to it. Just that, nothing more. That sentence alone could change the way a person moves through the world. The problem is that modern life has trained people to do the exact opposite. From childhood, the message has been the same everywhere. If something is wrong, fix it. If something is missing, get it. If something is broken, replace it. And for many things in life, that instinct is useful. But applied to life itself, to its uncertainty, to its losses, to its timing, that same instinct becomes a slow poison. People spend years arguing with reality. They argue with the past, wishing it had gone differently. They argue with the present, refusing to accept what is already here. They argue with the future, trying to control something that has not yet arrived. And in all that arguing, the only moment that actually exists, this one, right now, quietly slips away. Buddhism calls this the prison of attachment. Not attachment to people or love or beauty, but attachment to the idea that life must be a certain way for you to be okay inside it. Here is the quiet secret. Happiness does not grow when life finally becomes what you wanted it to be. Happiness grows the moment you stop needing it to be anything other than what it is. That's not resignation. That's a kind of freedom most people have never even tried. The ancient monks did not live perfect lives. They faced illness, hunger, loss, uncertainty, the same spectrum of difficulty that every human being faces. The difference was not that their lives were easier. The difference was that they were not at war with their lives.
And that war, the constant inner war between how things are and how things should be, is the single greatest thief of human peace. It takes away the morning. It takes away the meal. It takes away the conversation. It takes away the simple pleasure of being alive on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. There is a moment, and almost everyone has had it at least once, where life was falling apart on the outside, but something inside went strangely still. Where in the middle of difficulty, there was a second of pure clarity, of just being. And in that second, oddly, there was peace. That moment was not an accident. That was the mind briefly stopping its resistance. That was acceptance, just for a second, doing what it always does when it is allowed in. That is what this entire journey is going to be about. Not convincing anyone to give up, not teaching emotional numbness, but slowly, carefully, and very honestly unpacking the ancient Buddhist understanding of why life becomes lighter the moment it is no longer being fought. Because somewhere between the life that was planned and the life that actually arrived, there is a door. And on the other side of that door is something so simple it almost sounds like nothing, but it changes everything. Why fighting reality is the real source of your pain. There is a kind of exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. Most people know exactly what that feels like. They wake up tired, not because the body did not rest, but because the mind never stopped working, never stopped replaying, never stopped rearranging things that have already happened, never stopped rehearsing things that may never happen. And the strange part is, none of that mental work changes a single thing in the actual world. It just costs everything inside. That exhaustion has a name in Buddhist understanding. It is called the war with what is. Picture a river, wide, steady, moving in one direction. Now imagine a person standing in the middle of it, pushing against the current with both hands, screaming at the water to go the other way. The river does not notice. The river does not slow down. The river does not care. But the person is now completely drained, soaking wet, going nowhere, and somehow still convinced that if they just push a little harder, the water will finally listen. That is not stubbornness. That is the human mind doing exactly what it was never designed to stop doing. Buddhism does not call this stupidity. It calls this dukkha. And dukkha is one of the most misunderstood words in all of Eastern philosophy. People translate it as suffering, but that translation is too simple. Dukkha is closer to this feeling of chronic unsettledness, the sense that something is always slightly off, that life keeps not quite fitting the shape the mind has decided it should take. It is not dramatic pain every day. It is a low, steady friction, like a wheel that is just a little bit out of round. It still rolls, but nothing about it is smooth. And the source of that friction, according to the Buddha, is not the world. It is the gap between what is and what the mind insists should be. Here's where it gets interesting. The human brain is genuinely brilliant at comparison. It evolved to compare. Is this food safe or dangerous? Is this person friend or threat? Is this situation better or worse than yesterday? That ability to compare kept the species alive for hundreds of thousands of years. But in the modern mind, that same machinery runs constantly on things it was never designed for. It compares the life being lived to the life that was imagined. It compares the present moment to a memory of a better one. It compares who a person is right now to some future version of themselves that does not yet exist. And every single comparison generates the same quiet verdict: not enough, not right, not yet. The mind becomes its own judge, and it is never satisfied. A Zen story tells of a student who went to a master and said, "I've been practicing for 3 years and I still feel no peace. What am I doing wrong?" The master asked him, "When you eat, do you eat?" The student said, "Yes, of course." The master asked, "When you walk, do you walk?" The student said, "Yes." The master then said, "That is your problem. When you eat, you are thinking about your practice. When you walk, you are thinking about your results. You are never where you are. So where exactly do you expect to find peace?" That story is almost uncomfortably accurate for modern life. Think about a person sitting at dinner with family. The food is warm, the people they love are right there, and yet the mind is somewhere completely else. It is at the office. It is in an argument from last week. It is scrolling through an imaginary version of tomorrow. The dinner happens, but the person is not there for it, and afterward they wonder why life feels like it is passing by without them. It is passing by without them, because they keep leaving. This is what Buddhism means when it says that most human beings live everywhere except the present. And the present, ordinary and imperfect as it is the only place where life is actually occurring. Now here is the piece that most people resist hearing. Fighting reality does not feel like fighting. It feels like caring. It feels like being responsible. It feels like taking life seriously. When someone lies awake at night rehearsing a difficult conversation, it feels like preparation. When someone replays a painful memory over and over, it feels like trying to understand. When someone refuses to accept a situation they cannot change, it feels like refusing to give up. And so the fighting continues, dressed in the clothing of virtue, completely disguised as effort. But the Buddha made a distinction that cuts through all of that very cleanly. He separated what can be changed from what cannot, and he was not soft about it. He said clearly, there are things in life that can be acted upon. Act on them. There are things in life that cannot be changed, and to spend energy on those things is not strength. It is delusion. That is a hard line, but it is also a merciful one. Because once that line is drawn honestly, something shifts. The energy that was being poured into rearranging the unchangeable suddenly becomes available again. The mind that was running in 12 directions at once gets quiet enough to actually see what is in front of it. And what is in front of it, more often than not, is a life that is not nearly as broken as the war against it made it seem. There was a woman who lost her business during a financial crisis. Everything she had built over 8 years, gone in 4 months. For a long time she fought it. She replayed every decision. She blamed the timing, blamed others, blamed herself with a kind of ferocious energy that kept her completely locked in the past. A friend who had studied Buddhist philosophy said something simple to her one afternoon. She said, "The business is gone, that is true, but you are spending all your life in a building that no longer exists." The woman did not speak for a long time, and then she said, "I think I have been grieving the wrong thing. I have been grieving the business, but really I have been refusing to meet whoever I am now that it is gone." That is the real cost of fighting reality. It does not just drain energy, it delays the meeting with whoever you are on the other side of what happened. Every difficult experience in a life carries inside it a kind of invitation, not a cheerful one, not a welcome one, but a real one, an invitation to encounter a deeper, more honest version of oneself, one that was never going to show up in the comfortable version of events. Buddhism has always understood that the grit of life, the unwanted parts, the interruptions and losses and reversals are not obstacles to growth, they are the actual material of it. But none of that can be accessed while the mind is still fighting the fact that they happened. There's also something deeply ironic about the war with reality, and the irony is this. The mind fights reality in order to feel better, in order to feel safe,
in control, protected from future pain. But the fighting itself is what makes every day feel unsafe and out of control. The medicine is the poison. The very thing the mind reaches for to escape discomfort is the very thing making the discomfort permanent. A still lake reflects clearly. A lake that is constantly stirred by a stick reflects nothing. The stick thinks it is helping. The stick is the problem. Buddhism asks a question that sounds almost too simple to take seriously. What would happen if, just for a moment, nothing was resisted? Not forever, not as a surrender, just for a moment. What if whatever is here was allowed to just be here? And what most people discover when they actually try this, even for 60 seconds, is that the world does not collapse. The situation does not get worse. The pain does not grow. Something else happens instead. The noise gets quieter. And in that quiet, something that was buried under all the fighting finally gets a chance to breathe. That something is clarity. And clarity, the Buddha taught, is not a reward that comes at the end of a long journey. It is what naturally appears when the resistance finally, even briefly, stops. The war with reality is exhausting, not because life is too hard, but because no war with what already exists can ever be won. And somewhere inside, the part of a person that understands this is waiting, patiently, with a kind of quiet it has been holding on to for a very long time, waiting for the fighting to slow down just enough so it can finally be heard.
The Buddhist art of letting go without giving up. Two words have probably been said to every single person reading this at least once in their life. Let go. And every single time those two words were said, something inside quietly pushed back. Because letting go sounds simple until it is your dream that needs releasing, your relationship, your version of how things were supposed to turn out. And then those two words stop sounding like wisdom and start sounding like defeat, like someone is asking a drowning person to stop swimming. So before anything else is said here, let one thing be made absolutely clear. The Buddhist understanding of letting go has almost nothing to do with what most people think it means. There was a monk who kept a small clay pot in his room. One morning, a younger student accidentally knocked it off the shelf and it shattered on the floor. The student was horrified. He began apologizing desperately. The monk looked at the broken pieces for a moment and then said, "I have been waiting for that to happen since the day I got it." The student did not understand. The monk explained, "I have enjoyed that pot fully, every single day, because I always knew it would eventually break. I never pretended otherwise. And so when it broke, nothing was stolen from me. The joy was already complete." That, he said quietly, is what letting go actually looks like. It is not releasing the pot, it is never having gripped it so tightly that its breaking destroys you. Most people think letting go is something that happens after loss. Buddhism says letting go is something that happens before it. It is a way of holding things, not a way of dropping them. The word the Buddha actually used is a Sanskrit word, upadana. It is usually translated as clinging or grasping, and the image it creates is precise. Not a hand holding something, a hand gripping something so tightly that the knuckles go white, so tightly that the hand itself starts to hurt. And the strange tragedy of upadana is that the tighter the grip, the more certain the pain becomes, because everything that can be gripped is also something that can be lost, and the tighter the grip, the more catastrophic that loss feels when it finally arrives. And it always arrives. That is not pessimism, that is just the nature of things. Here is what letting go is not. It is not indifference. A person can love deeply and still hold that love with open hands. It is not weakness.
In fact, releasing something that the mind desperately wants to keep requires more strength than any grip ever could. It is not giving up on goals or stopping effort. A person can work hard towards something every single day and still remain genuinely unattached to whether it arrives on the expected schedule or in the expected shape. And it is absolutely not the same as not caring. Caring and clinging are two completely different things that often get mistaken for each other. Caring says, "This matters to me, and I will give it everything I have." Clinging says, "If this does not go the way I need it to, I will not be okay." That second sentence is where the suffering lives, not in the caring, in the condition attached to the caring. Buddhism draws a distinction here that is quiet but powerful. It separates the action from the outcome. A farmer plants seeds. The farmer cannot make it rain. The farmer cannot command the season. What the farmer can do is prepare the soil, plant carefully, water what is reachable, and then release the rest to forces that are simply not within human hands. That release is not laziness. That release is wisdom. Because the farmer who lies awake every night demanding that the weather obey them does not grow better crops. They just age faster. There is a practice in Zen Buddhism that illustrates this with unusual clarity. It is called Shoshin, or beginner's mind. The idea is to approach each moment as if encountering it for the very first time, without conclusions already formed, without the weight of what happened last time, without the expectation of what should happen this time, just meeting the moment as it is, fresh, curious, open. And what this practice reveals almost immediately is how much of daily life is not actually being lived. It is being filtered through layers of previous experience, previous disappointment, previous hope, until the actual present moment barely gets through at all. Letting go, in this sense, is not about the past. It is about right now. It is releasing the filter, allowing what is here to actually be here.
There is a particular kind of pain that comes not from what life has taken, but from what the mind refuses to put down. A person can be sitting in a perfectly peaceful room and be completely unreachable because they are carrying something from 3 years ago that the mind simply will not set down. The room is calm, but the person is not in the room. They are in the argument. They are in the loss. They are in the moment that did not go the way it should have. And they are there not because going there helps anything, but because letting go of it feels on some deep level like agreeing that it was okay, like forgiving something that should not be forgiven, like losing the last piece of something that mattered. Buddhism gently disagrees with this. It says holding the pain does not honor what was lost. It just ensures the loss keeps happening every single day, long after the original event has ended. A woman carried resentment toward her father for over 20 years. She told herself that releasing it would mean pretending he had not hurt her. A teacher once said to her, "Imagine picking up a stone every morning and carrying it all day because you were angry at the person who threw it at you. You are still bruised, the stone is still in your hands, and the person who threw it has not thought about it once." The resentment is not punishing them, it is just making the stone heavier every year. She sat with that for a long time, and then she said, "I think I confused holding on with holding my ground. Those are not the same thing at all." They are not. Holding ground means knowing what matters and refusing to abandon it. Holding on means refusing to release something that is already gone, already finished, already impossible to change. One is integrity, the other is suffering wearing the mask of integrity. Now here is the piece that Buddhism adds, which most other philosophies miss entirely. Letting go is not a single dramatic event. It is not a moment where the mind finally decides to release something and it floats away forever like a balloon. Real letting go is a practice. It is something done quietly, repeatedly, often without any sense of accomplishment. Because the mind grabs again, it always grabs again. And the practice is not to prevent the grabbing. The practice is to notice it and gently, without judgment, open the hand one more time. A meditation teacher once described it this way. He said, "You will let go of the same thing 1,000 times, and that is not failure. That is the practice." The person who lets go once and grabs again is not losing. They are a person who is doing what every human being does. What matters is the willingness to open the hand again, each time, without shame. This is where Buddhism is quietly revolutionary. It does not demand perfection in non-attachment. It does not say, let go once and never look back. It says, become familiar with the act of releasing. Make it a movement the mind knows how to make, so that when the big things arrive, the ones that truly test a person, the hand has already learned how to open. Because the things worth holding in this life are not held with a grip. They are held the way a person holds music, fully present for every note, not trying to trap any of them, knowing that the moment the hand closes around a note, it stops being music and becomes something else entirely, something smaller, something silent. Letting go is not the end of caring. It is the beginning of a different, deeper way of caring. One that allows things to be fully what they are, rather than slowly crushing them into what the mind needs them to be. And what most people discover, slowly, when they begin to practice this, is not loss. It is an unexpected lightness, like setting down a bag that was so familiar they had stopped noticing how heavy it was. And then standing up straight for the first time in years and realizing, with something close to disbelief, how much of the weight was never theirs to carry. Impermanence, the truth that sets you free. Everything you are looking at right now will one day not exist. The chair, the room, the city outside the window, the people whose voices are the most familiar sounds in the world to you, the version of yourself sitting here in this moment. All of it is moving. All of it is changing. All of it is passing through time the way a hand passes through water, leaving no permanent mark, going somewhere none of it planned to go. And the first reaction most people have to that truth is a quiet, cold discomfort, like a door opened somewhere and let the winter in. But Buddhism does not offer that truth as a threat. It offers it as the most liberating thing a human being can ever truly understand. There was a king in ancient India who came to the Buddha carrying the weight of a man who had everything and still could not sleep. He said, "I am afraid of losing my kingdom, my health, my family, my life, everything I love. I am terrified of losing." The Buddha did not comfort him with reassurance. He did not say, "Do not worry, it will all be fine." Instead, he said something that stopped the king completely. He said, "You are suffering not because you will lose these things. You are suffering because you believed you could keep them. That belief is the wound, not the loss itself." The king sat in silence for a long time, and then he asked, "Then what do I do with the love I have for them?" And the Buddha said, "Love them fully, knowing they are passing." That knowing does not shrink the love, it makes the love honest. The Pali word is anicca, impermanence. It is one of the 3 marks of existence in Buddhist teaching, and it is perhaps the one that lands the hardest because it is the one that asks the most. It does not just ask a person to accept that bad things change, it asks them to accept that good things change too. That the beautiful morning will become afternoon, that the person laughing at the table tonight will one day not be there. That the version of a person's life that finally feels right is also moving, also shifting, also temporary in ways that cannot be negotiated with. And the mind absolutely hates this. It wants to freeze the good things, frame them, preserve them, hold them exactly as they are.
There is a beautiful and slightly heartbreaking Buddhist tradition called sand mandalas. Monks spend days, sometimes weeks, creating extraordinarily detailed and colorful artworks using nothing but colored sand, grain by grain, breath by breath. The precision involved is almost incomprehensible. And when the mandala is finally complete, when it is perhaps the most beautiful thing in the room, the monks sweep it away, deliberately, completely. They gather the sand and release it into a river. And this is not tragedy, this is the entire point. The creation was never about the result, it was about the act of creating fully, knowing from the very first grain of sand that it would not last. And somehow, because of that knowledge, not despite it, the making of it was entirely, completely alive. That is what Anicca is really teaching. Not that nothing matters because nothing lasts, but that everything matters more precisely because it does not last. Think about what happens to a person when they receive a medical diagnosis that changes their sense of time. Suddenly, the ordinary Tuesday morning becomes something worth noticing. The cup of tea has a flavor that was always there but never tasted. The phone call from an old friend becomes not an interruption, but something quietly precious. Nothing about the world changed, only the awareness of its impermanence sharpened. And that sharpness, painful as its cause may be, brings a kind of presence that most comfortable, unlimited time simply never produces. Buddhism is saying, quietly and persistently, that awareness is available right now, without the diagnosis, without the crisis, without waiting for loss to teach what impermanence has always been trying to show. Here is the irony that sits at the center of all of this. The very things people cling to most tightly in an effort to keep them are often the things that suffer most from the clinging. A relationship gripped with fear of losing it slowly becomes suffocating. A moment of joy desperately held onto curdles into anxiety. A period of success treated as something that must be permanently maintained becomes a source of constant low-level dread. The grip does not protect the thing, the grip changes the thing. Slowly, quietly, until what was once open and alive becomes something contracted and defended, and in the end, very difficult to actually enjoy. The Japanese have a word for this, mono no aware. It translates roughly as the gentle sadness of things. It is the feeling of watching cherry blossoms fall. It is not pure grief, it is not pure joy. It is something that contains both. A kind of tender awareness that the beauty and the ending are not separate things, that the falling of the blossom is part of what makes watching it matter. There is wisdom folded into that feeling that Buddhism has understood for millennia, and that the modern world, in its relentless pursuit of permanence, has almost entirely forgotten.
Because the modern world is essentially a machine built to fight impermanence, anti-aging products, guarantees and warranties, insurance against every conceivable form of change, storage units full of things no longer used but impossible to release, social media profiles carefully constructed to project a version of a life that looks stable and successful and permanent. All of it driven by the same deep and very human terror of the truth that the Buddha simply sat with and looked at directly. Things change, people leave, moments end, seasons turn, and none of it asks permission. There was an old woman in a mountain village who had lived through an extraordinary number of losses in her life. 3 children outlived her, a husband, a home destroyed twice. When a younger woman once asked her how she had survived it all without becoming bitter, the old woman thought for a moment and then said something that the younger woman never forgot. She said, "I learned early that grief is the price of love, and change is the price of life. So I paid both, gladly, because the alternative was to love nothing and expect nothing, and that is not surviving. That is just existing in a very comfortable kind of death. That is not resignation. That is a woman who understood anicca not as a philosophy, but as a lived truth in the bones. Here is something that almost nobody talks about when discussing impermanence. It does not only apply to the good things. The painful things are impermanent too. The shame that feels permanent is not. The grief that seems like it will never lift is also moving, also changing, also subject to the same law that governs everything else. The worst period of a person's life is not a destination. It is a weather pattern, and weather patterns, every single one of them, eventually move on. Buddhism uses the image of clouds and sky for this. Thoughts, emotions, circumstances, they are the clouds. They arrive. They are sometimes dark and heavy, and they block out everything. But the sky does not become the cloud. The sky remains still, spacious, unchanged beneath whatever is passing through it. The practice is not to get rid of the clouds. The practice is to remember that there is a sky. That underneath every difficult season, something in a person remains that is not being destroyed by it. Something that will still be there when the clouds move, as they always do. Impermanence, understood at this depth, stops being a source of terror and becomes something closer to a compass. It reorients the whole of a life. It points attention away from the frantic project of keeping things the same and towards something far more intelligent. The full engagement with what is here, right now, not because it will last, but precisely because it will not. A monk was once asked, if everything is impermanent, why do anything at all? Why build? Why love? Why create? Why try? He smiled and said, because the river does not stop flowing because it reaches the sea. It flows because flowing is its nature. The flowing is the point, not the arriving. That answer contains something that takes time to fully land, but when it does, it changes the texture of an entire life. Because it removes the condition, it removes the requirement that effort must produce permanence in order to have been worth making. It allows a person to love without requiring the love to last forever in order to have been real. It allows a person to build something knowing it may not outlive them, and building it anyway because the building itself is the meaning. Impermanence is not the enemy of a good life. It is the very engine of one. Without it, nothing new could arrive. Without it, spring could not follow winter. Without it, there would be no room for better, no possibility of healing, no reason for hope. The same force that takes away also makes room, always, without exception. And perhaps the deepest gift that this truth offers when a person finally stops resisting it and simply lets it be true is this: it makes right now enough. Not a stepping stone to somewhere else, not a problem to be solved before life can properly begin. Just this moment in all its ordinary, impermanent, unrepeatable reality. Enough, completely, exactly as it is. How acceptance rewires the way you see the world. There is a moment that happens to almost everyone at some point in their life. A moment where something that was once completely unbearable suddenly becomes not easy exactly, but somehow manageable. Where a truth that used to send the mind into panic quietly becomes just another part of the landscape. And when people look back at that shift, they almost never remember a dramatic decision. They remember something quieter. A morning where they woke up and realized the fighting had stopped. Not because they gave up, but because something inside had finally, without announcement, accepted what was real.
That shift is not weakness. That shift is the beginning of an entirely different way of seeing. Most people understand acceptance as something passive, as a kind of emotional white flag, as though accepting a situation means endorsing it, approving it, deciding it was fine all along. But that understanding is so incomplete, it is almost the opposite of the truth. Acceptance in the Buddhist sense is not a surrender of perception, it is a sharpening of it, because the mind that is no longer spending its energy fighting what is real suddenly has something it almost never had before: clarity. Real, unfiltered, honest clarity about what is actually in front of it. And clarity changes everything, not loudly, but permanently. The brain, as it turns out, is not a neutral recording device. It does not simply observe reality and report it back accurately. It filters, it edits, it runs everything through the lens of what the mind expects, fears, wants, and resists. Neuroscience has spent decades documenting this, but Buddhism arrived at the same understanding 25 centuries earlier through nothing more sophisticated than the careful, disciplined observation of how the mind actually works. What both arrive at is the same quiet conclusion. A mind in resistance does not see clearly. It sees a version of reality that has been distorted by the resistance itself. A person who is angry at someone will misread their neutral expression as hostile. A person who is afraid of failure will interpret ordinary feedback as devastating criticism. A person who is convinced that their life is wrong will find evidence of that wrongness everywhere, not because it is everywhere, but because the lens they are looking through is designed to find it. This is what Buddhism calls wrong view. And it does not mean having bad values or believing something evil. It simply means seeing through a lens so clouded by wanting and resisting that what comes through the other side barely resembles what is actually there. There's a classic Buddhist teaching about this, involving two monks who observe the same flag moving in the wind. One says the flag is moving, the other says the wind is moving. They debate this with increasing intensity. A master walks past and says, "Neither the flag nor the wind is moving. Your minds are moving." And while this sounds like a riddle, what it is actually pointing at is something very concrete. The argument was never about the flag. It was about two minds so committed to their own framing of reality that they completely lost the ability to simply see what was there. Two minds seeing the same moment and constructing two entirely different realities, and neither of them stopping long enough to ask whether their construction was accurate. Acceptance interrupts that construction. It does not replace it with some perfect objective view of things, but it loosens the grip of the distorted one. It creates just enough space between what the mind feels and what the mind sees for something more honest to come through. And once that honesty starts coming through, the world does not look like a worse place. It looks like a more real one, which, after years of living inside distortion, feels almost shockingly peaceful. Here is a practical example that most people will recognize immediately. Two people lose their jobs on the same day. Same company, same circumstances. Within 3 months, one of them has found a new path, reconnected with a skill they had buried years ago, and describes the entire experience as something that, despite its difficulty, opened a door they never would have opened themselves. The other is in the same place internally that they were on the first day, still furious, still replaying, still unable to move because the mind is so locked in resistance to what happened that it has no energy left for what comes next. Same event, completely different internal worlds. And the difference is not intelligence or talent or luck. The difference is acceptance and its absence. Buddhism is not surprised by this. It is always said that the external event is rarely what shapes the quality of a life. What shapes the quality of a life is the relationship the mind forms with the external event. Now here's the part where this gets genuinely interesting. Acceptance does not just change how a situation feels. Over time, practiced consistently, it literally changes what a person notices. Because the mind, freed from the constant project of arguing with reality, starts to look at the world differently. It starts noticing things it was previously too busy to see. Small things, the way light falls across a floor in the late afternoon, the particular quality of a silence between two people who are genuinely comfortable with each other, the moment a conversation shifts from surface to something real, the taste of food eaten slowly instead of consumed anxiously. None of these things changed. They were always there, but they were invisible behind the noise of resistance.
A man who had practiced Buddhist meditation for many years described it this way. He said, "I used to walk down the same street every day for 15 years and see problems, traffic, noise, rudeness, everything wrong with the city. Then something shifted in my practice, and I walked down that same street and I saw people, just people. Tired people, curious people, people carrying things, people in a hurry, people who were quietly kind to each other in ways I had never once noticed. The street did not change, but I finally arrived in it." That arrival, that is what acceptance makes possible. There's a teaching in Buddhism about something called the near enemy. Every virtue has a near enemy, a feeling or attitude that looks like the virtue from the outside, but is actually its quiet opposite. The near enemy of acceptance is resignation, and the difference is internal, but it is enormous. Resignation says nothing matters, so why try? It is heavy and gray and flattening. Acceptance says this is what is real, and from here I will move honestly. It is clear and grounded and surprisingly full of possibility. Because you cannot navigate accurately from a distorted map, and the mind in resistance is always working from a distorted map. Acceptance hands a person an accurate map for the first time, and an accurate map, even of difficult terrain, is infinitely more useful than a beautiful map of somewhere that does not exist. Here is something that Buddhism points to that takes time to fully absorb. Acceptance is not a destination. It is not a permanent state that once reached never needs to be visited again. It is more like a direction the mind learns to return to, because the mind will wander. It will resist again. It will construct again. It will argue with reality again, sometimes within minutes of having just released that argument. And the practice is not to prevent that wandering. The practice is to notice it sooner each time, to return more quickly, to make the path back to clarity more and more familiar until it becomes, if not effortless, at least instinctive. A river always finds the sea, not because the path is clear, but because finding the lowest ground is simply the nature of water. Acceptance practiced long enough becomes the nature of the mind in the same way, the natural direction it tends toward, even when it temporarily flows somewhere else. And the world seen from that direction is a genuinely different place, not a perfect place, not a painless place, not a place where everything makes sense or everything works out, but a place that is actually fully, honestly seen, which is something that most human beings, despite living in the world their entire lives, almost never experience. Because seeing requires stillness, and stillness requires that the war, at least for a moment, comes to an end. There is something the Buddha said that has stayed in Buddhist teaching for thousands of years precisely because it keeps being true every time a person tests it against their own experience. He said, "The trouble is that you think you have time. Not time to accept things, time to keep fighting them, time to eventually arrive at some future version of events where acceptance will finally make sense. But that future version never comes, because the mind that keeps refusing to accept what is right now will refuse to accept what is right in front of it tomorrow as well. Acceptance is not waiting for the right moment. It is understanding that this moment, this exact one, is the only place where anything like peace has ever actually lived." And the extraordinary thing, the thing that surprises almost everyone who genuinely practices this, is how quickly the world starts to look different. Not in weeks, not after a long retreat or a dramatic transformation, sometimes in a single afternoon, a single walk, a single quiet decision to stop arguing with what is and simply, carefully, honestly look at it. Because the world was never the problem, the lens was. And acceptance, more than anything else, is the slow, patient, deeply human act of cleaning the glass. The middle path, living fully without chasing or running.
Before the Buddha was the Buddha, he was a prince, and not just any prince. He was a young man who had been deliberately shielded from every form of suffering his entire childhood. His father, a king, had been told by a prophecy that his son would either become a great ruler or a great spiritual teacher. Terrified of the second option, the king built a world around the boy that contained only beauty, only pleasure, only comfort. No aging, no sickness, no death, no poverty, just an endlessly curated existence designed to make him want for nothing. And for years it worked. The prince had everything, and felt, underneath all of it, a quiet unease he could not name. The day he finally left the palace walls and saw for the first time an old man, a sick man, a corpse, and a wandering monk, something in him broke open permanently. Not in grief, in recognition, as though the truth he had been protected from had been living inside him all along, waiting for permission to be acknowledged. What followed was not a gentle spiritual awakening. It was a swing to the complete opposite extreme. The prince left everything. He became an ascetic. He joined a group of monks who practiced extreme self-denial. No comfort, no food beyond what was absolutely necessary to survive, no shelter beyond what the earth offered without effort. He sat in meditation through heat and cold. He reduced his eating to almost nothing. For years, he pushed the body and mind to the absolute edge of endurance, convinced that the answer to suffering was the complete annihilation of desire. And he was brilliant at it. Other monks marveled at his discipline. He became one of the most extreme ascetics of his time, and he still did not find what he was looking for. The story goes that one evening, near collapse, he heard a music teacher on a passing boat instructing a student. The teacher said, "If the string is too loose, it will not play. If the string is too tight, it will break. Only the middle tension produces music." And something in those words, so ordinary, so practical, landed in the future Buddha like an arrow finding its mark. He accepted a bowl of rice from a young woman passing by. His fellow monks, appalled by what they saw as weakness, left him in disgust, and he sat down under a tree with a nourished body, a quiet mind, and for the first time in years, something genuinely open in his chest. That night, he found what he had been looking for, and the path he discovered has been called ever since the middle way. The middle way is perhaps the most misunderstood of all Buddhist teachings. People hear middle and think compromise. They think mediocrity. They think a life of mild pleasures and mild efforts, carefully calibrated to offend nobody and achieve nothing remarkable. As though the Buddha, after everything he went through, arrived at the conclusion that the answer to life was to just be moderately okay about everything. That is not even close to what he meant. The middle way is not about finding the average between two extremes. It is about transcending the entire logic of extremes altogether. Because here is what the prince discovered in those years of swinging between palace and wilderness. Both extremes were driven by the same force. Both of them were reactions. The palace life was a reaction to the fear of suffering. The ascetic life was a reaction to the presence of suffering. One ran toward comfort, one ran away from discomfort, but both were running. Both were driven by the same restless, exhausting energy of a mind that could not simply be where it was without needing to manage the experience aggressively. The middle way says stop running, in either direction. Stop chasing the pleasant and stop fleeing the unpleasant. Not because pleasant and unpleasant do not exist, they absolutely do, but because a life organized entirely around chasing one and escaping the other never actually arrives anywhere. It just keeps moving, frantically, constantly, and the person inside it, despite all that movement, never actually feels like they have arrived. There is a particular kind of person the modern world produces in abundance, a person who is always optimizing, always upgrading, always looking for the better version of the job, the relationship, the neighborhood, the body, the morning routine. And there is nothing wrong with growth or improvement in themselves. But when the search for better becomes a permanent state, when there is never a moment of genuine arrival, when the present is always just a waiting room for a future that keeps moving further away, that is not ambition. That is a very sophisticated form of running.
Buddhism watches this with a kind of quiet recognition. It has seen this before. It saw it in a palace. It knows exactly where that road goes. On the other side sits a different kind of person, the one who has been hurt enough times that they have stopped wanting things altogether, who has learned to expect nothing because expectation leads to disappointment, who has built walls thin enough to breathe through but thick enough to keep the world at a manageable distance, who calls this wisdom but feels underneath the calm surface a particular kind of loneliness that comes from never fully arriving in anything. This too is running, just in the opposite direction, away from the risk of wanting. The middle way stands between these two and says there is another option. And that option is full, honest, eyes-open engagement with life as it actually is. Not chasing the good moments, not bracing against the difficult ones, but meeting all of it with the same quality of presence, the same willingness to be genuinely here for whatever is genuinely happening. This is harder than it sounds because the mind is extraordinarily well trained in both chasing and running. It has been practicing one or the other, usually both, for most of a person's life. Sitting in the middle, actually still, actually present, actually neither reaching forward nor pulling back, feels almost physically uncomfortable at first, like a muscle that has only ever been used in one direction being asked to simply relax. The relaxation itself feels wrong, suspicious, like something must be being missed. But gradually, with practice, something shifts. The stillness stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like presence, real presence, the kind that was never available in the running. A conversation becomes fully entered into rather than half experienced while the mind plans its response. A meal becomes tasted rather than consumed. A difficult emotion becomes felt rather than immediately suppressed or immediately amplified, and slowly the texture of ordinary life changes, not because the life changed, because the relationship to it did. The Buddhist teacher Ajahn Chah described the middle way with an image that is almost absurdly simple but lands with unusual force. He said, "Imagine you're holding a cat. If you grip it too tightly, it struggles and scratches and tries to escape. If you hold it too loosely, it wanders off. But if you hold it with just the right quality of attention, relaxed but present, it simply sits, peacefully, completely itself, and you are completely yourself holding it, neither of you needing the other to be different." That image of two beings, simply, genuinely, without agenda, at rest in each other's presence, is perhaps the best description of what the middle way actually feels like when it is lived rather than just understood. Because the middle way is not primarily a philosophical position, it is a lived orientation. It cannot be figured out and then applied. It has to be practiced, moment by moment, in the actual texture of daily life. In the way a person responds to inconvenience, in the way they handle praise and the way they handle criticism, in whether they can eat a meal without distraction, in whether they can sit in silence without reaching for something to fill it, in whether they can let a good moment be good without immediately worrying about when it will end. These small, unglamorous daily life moments are where the middle way either lives or does not. There is something else the middle way teaches that is rarely discussed. It teaches a person to stop being managed by their own preferences. Because preferences in themselves are not the problem. Every human being has preferences. The problem is when preferences become demands, when "I would like" becomes "I require," when the pleasant is not simply enjoyed but clung to, when the unpleasant is not simply weathered but treated as a personal injustice. That escalation from preference to demand is exactly where the middle way gets abandoned. And it is usually such a small step made so automatically that most people never even notice it happening. A person practicing the middle way notices, not perfectly, not always in time to prevent the step, but with increasing frequency. And that noticing, that small moment of awareness where the mind catches itself in the act of demanding, is itself the practice.
It is the string being tuned, neither too loose nor too tight, adjusting, always gently adjusting toward the tension that produces music. The Buddha spent the remaining 45 years of his life after that night under the tree teaching, and almost everything he taught in those 4 decades was, in one way or another, an elaboration of that single insight from the music teacher on the boat. Not too tight, not too loose, fully present, genuinely alive, neither fleeing nor grasping, just here, engaged with what is real, moving through it without being destroyed by it and without pretending it is something other than what it is. That is not a small thing. That is, depending on how honestly it is applied, an entirely different way of being a human being. And perhaps the most radical part of it is this: the middle way does not ask a person to become someone else. It does not demand a personality transplant or a wholesale abandonment of everything they are. It simply asks them to become more honestly, more fully, more presently what they already are. Without the running, without the chasing, without the constant low-grade war against the shape of their own life. Just here, just this, just the string at the right tension, ready at any moment to make music from whatever the day actually brings. Your new beginning starts with one simple choice. There is a moment that arrives for almost every person who has walked far enough through life. Not a dramatic moment, not the kind that announces itself with noise or ceremony. It arrives quietly, usually on an ordinary day, in the middle of something completely unremarkable. And in that moment, without any particular reason, a person becomes suddenly, briefly, absolutely clear about one thing: that the life they have been waiting to start living is already happening, that it has been happening all along, and that the only thing ever standing between them and it was a single, quiet, daily choice they did not know they were allowed to make. That choice is acceptance, and it is available right now, in this exact moment. Not after things improve, not after the situation changes, not after some future version of events finally makes acceptance feel earned. Right now, as things are, exactly as imperfect and uncertain and unfinished as they are. Buddhism does not end with a destination. This is something that surprises people who come to it expecting a finish line. There is no moment where a person graduates into permanent peace and never struggles again. There is no enlightenment that arrives like a certificate in the mail and solves everything from that point forward. The teaching ends every single time with a return to the present moment, with a return to this breath, this step, this ordinary, unremarkable second of being alive. Because that is where every genuine transformation has always actually lived. Not in the dramatic, in the daily. Not in the extraordinary, in the honest, quiet, consistent choosing of presence over resistance. That choosing is not glamorous. That is perhaps the most important thing to say about it. There was an old monk who had practiced for 60 years. A young student came to him expecting to hear something profound, something philosophical, something that would rearrange the architecture of his understanding. The student asked, "After 60 years of practice, what has changed?" The old monk thought for a moment. Then he said, "When I am cold, I put on a coat. When I am hungry, I eat. When I am tired, I sleep." The student was confused. He said, "But is that not what everyone does?" The monk smiled. He said, "Yes, but I do not spend the cold wishing it were warm. I do not spend the hunger wishing I had already eaten. I do not spend the tiredness wishing I had slept more. I simply put on the coat. I simply eat. I simply sleep." The student sat with that for a long time, and slowly, something in it opened. That is the whole of it, not as a reduction, as a completion. The journey through these ideas, through impermanence and resistance, through letting go and the middle path, through the way acceptance rewires perception and the daily practices that root a person in something steady, all of it points here, to this.
to the willingness to meet life as it is without adding the second arrow, without firing the extra suffering on top of the unavoidable difficulty, without spending the morning in yesterday or the evening in tomorrow, without waiting for conditions to be right before allowing the present to be enough. Because conditions will never all be right. That is not pessimism. That is just the honest nature of a life that is always moving, always changing, always arriving in forms nobody fully planned for. And the person who is waiting for conditions to align before they begin truly living is, without always knowing it, making the saddest possible trade. They are exchanging the life they have for the idea of a life that has not yet arrived and may never arrive in the exact form they need it to. Buddhism looks at that trade with tremendous compassion, not judgment, compassion, because it understands exactly why the mind makes it. The mind makes it out of love in a strange way, out of the very human desire to protect itself from disappointment, from uncertainty, from the raw vulnerability of fully showing up for something that might not go the way it is hoped. That protection instinct is not a flaw in human nature, but it is a cost, and the cost is the present moment, over and over again. There is a teaching about a man who carried a heavy stone on his back for many years because someone told him it was precious. One day a traveler passed and said, "Do you know what that stone is?" The man said proudly, "It is the most valuable thing I own." The traveler looked at it carefully and said gently, "That is limestone. It is everywhere. You can put it down." The man stared at the stone, and then he did something that surprised even himself. He did not feel foolish. He felt, after years of carrying, an almost unbearable lightness. He sat on the grass. He looked at the sky, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, his back was straight.
The stone that most people carry is not a bad life. It is the story about their life. The story that says it should be different. The story that says something is wrong with how things turned out. The story that says real life begins when this, whatever this is finally resolved. That story is the limestone, and it is everywhere. It is available to be put down, right now, on any ordinary afternoon. What follows the putting down is not perfection. Nobody is promising perfection. What follows is something quieter and more durable than perfection. It is the capacity to be genuinely present for what is actually here, which, when experienced without the filter of resistance, turns out to be far more extraordinary than the mind, busy with its fighting, ever had time to notice. A flower does not apologize for blooming in an inconvenient season. A river does not regret the shape of the valley it moves through. The morning does not hesitate because yesterday was difficult. There is something in the natural world that simply, completely, without negotiation, is what it is and does what it does. And Buddhism has always looked at that unself-conscious aliveness and said, that is the direction. Not to become less human, but to become more honestly, less apologetically, less conditionally alive. The human version of that aliveness is acceptance, not a passive, collapsed acceptance, but the active, clear-eyed, grounded acceptance of someone who has looked honestly at what is real and decided to work from there rather than from somewhere imaginary, who has decided to love what is actually present rather than mourn the absence of what was planned, who has decided that this life, this one, the actual one happening right now with all its gaps and graces and ordinary Tuesday afternoons, is worth showing up for, fully, without reservation. That decision does not need a mountain retreat to be made. It does not require years of meditation or a library of Buddhist texts or a teacher sitting across from you in incense-scented silence. It requires one thing, one honest moment of looking at the life that is here and choosing, instead of turning away, to simply be in it, completely, without the footnote about how it should be better. And then, choosing that again tomorrow and the day after, not because it becomes easy, but because each choosing makes the next one slightly more familiar, slightly less like a sacrifice, and slightly more like coming home. Here is the thought that this entire journey has been quietly building toward. The happiness that everyone is searching for is not hidden somewhere ahead of them. It is not locked behind a better version of their circumstances. It is not waiting on the other side of a problem being solved, or a wound being healed, or a situation finally aligning the way it was supposed to. It is here, growing right now in the soil of whatever is real. Growing in exact proportion to how honestly, how completely, how gently a person is willing to accept what that soil actually is. That is the secret the old monk knew. That is what the man felt when he put down the stone. That is what the Buddha found, not in the palace and not in the wilderness, but in the honest, nourished, clear-minded middle ground of a single evening under a tree. Happiness does not grow when life finally becomes what was wanted. Happiness grows the moment that wanting gives way to meeting, the moment the searching quiets enough for the arriving to be noticed, the moment a person stops being a visitor in their own life and becomes, at last, genuinely home in it. Now there is only one thing left to say, and it is not complicated. Take whatever stayed with you from this conversation, from this entire journey through these ideas, and carry one piece of it into tomorrow. Not all of it, not a new philosophy to maintain perfectly, just one thing, one small, honest practice, one moment in the day where the fighting is paused and the presence is chosen instead, and see what that one moment does to the texture of the day around it. If something in these words reached you, if any part of this conversation opened something or named something you had been feeling without words, leave a comment below and tell us what it was. Because your words do not just help this channel grow, they become something another person finds on a difficult night when they need to know that someone else has sat with the same questions. Like this video if it gave you something real. Share it with someone who is carrying something heavy right now. Subscribe to Wisdom Woven so this conversation continues, because there is still so much worth sitting with together. And as you move forward from this moment, remember what the old monk said. When it is cold, put on the coat. When it is difficult, meet it. When it is beautiful, be there for it. When it is ordinary, which it mostly will be there for that too. Completely, without waiting for it to become something else first. That is where happiness grows. That is where it has always grown, in the quiet, radical, utterly simple act of accepting life exactly as it is.